Something was recorded on a remote stretch of land in northeastern Utah that the people who filmed it did not want released. Not because it was embarrassing, not because it was inconclusive, but because, according to multiple sources close to the production, what appeared in those frames could not be explained by anyone on the team, and the decision was made to pull it before it reached the public. That footage has now surfaced, and the conversation it is starting is unlike anything this location has generated in over 3 decades of documented investigation. Subscribe and stay until the very end, because the full context of what was captured, when it was captured, and what it appears to show only becomes clear once you understand the entire chain of events leading up to that moment. Skinwalker Ranch sits on approximately 512 acres in the Uinta Basin, Duchesne County, Utah. The coordinates place it at roughly 40 degrees, 26 minutes north latitude, 109 degrees, 54 minutes west longitude. The elevation at the valley floor is approximately 5,200 feet above sea level, rising to over 6,000 feet at the northeastern ridgeline. The ranch is bounded to the north by the Uinta Mountains, one of the only major mountain ranges in the continental United States that runs east to west rather than north to south. That geological anomaly is not a footnote. Researchers who have studied this region for decades argue that the unusual orientation of the Uinta Range creates a specific set of subsurface pressure dynamics, electromagnetic corridor effects, and fault-line interactions that do not exist anywhere else in comparable concentration. Whether that geological uniqueness has anything to do with the reported phenomena is a question that remains genuinely open, but the physical setting is the foundation of every claim ever made about this property, and understanding it is non-negotiable before any footage can be properly evaluated. The recorded history of anomalous events at the ranch stretches back well before it became publicly known. Local Ute tribal oral traditions describe the Uinta Basin as a place of power and danger, a corridor associated with shapeshifters and boundary-crossing entities, for which the property eventually borrowed its colloquial name. That cultural designation was not invented after the paranormal notoriety. It predates it by generations. The Ute people did not farm or settle within certain areas of the basin, not because the land was agriculturally unproductive, but because of a cultural prohibition rooted in the specific nature of what they believed occupied it. That distinction matters because it removes the circularity argument, the claim that the ranch's reputation was built retroactively around the land's name. The name and the avoidance behavior predate the modern investigation by centuries. The modern chapter begins in earnest in 1994, when Terry and Gwen Sherman purchased the property for approximately $200,000 from a family that had reportedly experienced severe and escalating disturbances over the preceding years. The Shermans came in skeptical. They were ranchers, practical people with no documented interest in paranormal claims. Within 18 months, they were reporting cattle mutilations of a type that left veterinarians without explanation. Not predator activity, not natural decomposition, but precise and bloodless excision of organs and tissue, with no tracks in the surrounding soil. They were reporting structured aerial objects moving at speeds and angles inconsistent with any aircraft registered in FAA records for that region during that period. And they were reporting encounters with animals that behaved in ways that contradicted every established pattern of regional wildlife behavior. The Shermans sold the property in 1996 to Robert Bigelow, the aerospace entrepreneur and founder of the National Institute for Discovery Science, for approximately $200,000. Bigelow's acquisition was not casual. It was the direct result of a systematic review of anomalous activity reports, and he moved a dedicated research team onto the property within months of purchase. The National Institute for Discovery Science, commonly referred to as NIDS, conducted investigations at Skinwalker Ranch from 1996 through approximately 2004. Their methodology was serious. Their team included physicists, biologists, veterinarians, and former military intelligence personnel. They deployed camera networks, spectral sensors, and soil analysis equipment. They documented events they could not explain. They also documented a phenomenon that would come to define the frustrating core of any serious investigation of this location: the apparent intelligence or awareness of whatever was generating the anomalies. Phenomena seemed to cease or migrate when direct observation was attempted. Equipment malfunctioned in ways inconsistent with environmental interference. Animals responded to presences that registered on no sensor, while simultaneously behaving in ways the research team found genuinely alarming. NIDS published no comprehensive final report. Their internal documentation was retained and in later years became the subject of Freedom of Information Act inquiries that produced only partial and heavily redacted returns. In 2016, Brandon Fugal, a Utah-based real estate developer, acquired Skinwalker Ranch from Bigelow for a price that has never been officially confirmed but is widely reported to have been in the range of $4 million. Fugal's approach differed from Bigelow's in one significant way: transparency. Where Bigelow operated in near-total secrecy, Fugal opened the property to a production team and ultimately to the television series that began airing on the History Channel in 2020. The show, which has now run for multiple seasons, documents ongoing scientific investigation in real time, featuring a core team that includes physicists, biologists, ground-penetrating radar specialists, and aerospace engineers. The production has been criticized for its pacing and its tendency toward cliffhangers, but the underlying data captured across multiple seasons, radiation spikes, anomalous aerial objects, subsurface anomalies, unexplained physiological effects on personnel, has been examined by independent analysts who do not dismiss it as fabrication. The footage that has now surfaced was not part of any broadcast episode. That is the first and most important thing to understand. It was recorded during a filming window that fell between two broadcast seasons, during a period when the production team was conducting what multiple insiders describe as an unscripted, unstructured documentation session. No cameras staged for dramatic effect, no narrative arc being constructed in real time, just equipment running continuously across multiple locations on the property during a 72-hour observation window in late autumn. The exact date has not been independently confirmed, but sourcing places it within the last 4 years, making it consistent with the period of active filming under Fugal's ownership. The location within the property is described as the area northeast of the homestead building, closer to the tree line that marks the beginning of the gradual ascent toward the mesa. This is significant because the northeastern quadrant of the ranch has produced a disproportionate number of the most difficult to explain incidents across all documented investigation periods. It is the area where the NIDS team recorded the incident involving what appeared to be a structured object emerging from what multiple witnesses described as a tier or portal in the air approximately 20 feet above the field surface. That incident, which occurred in the late 1990s, was never satisfactorily captured on camera at the time. The camera recording that area during that night experienced a complete and unrecoverable data loss that engineers at the time attributed to a power surge with no identified source. What the recently surfaced footage appears to show unfolds across approximately 11 minutes and 40 seconds of continuous recording from a fixed camera position. The camera is a high-resolution infrared unit, the type used for long-duration nocturnal observation, operating in conditions of near-total ambient darkness. For the first several minutes, the recording shows nothing beyond the expected landscape features: tree line, field, subtle atmospheric haze near the ground surface consistent with the temperature differential between a cold late autumn night and residual ground warmth. Normal, unremarkable. Then, at approximately the 6-minute and 20-second mark, the infrared signature changes. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but in a way that analysts who have reviewed the footage describe as deeply inconsistent with any natural atmospheric process they can identify. A region of the frame, roughly centered on a point approximately 40 yards from the camera position and perhaps 15 feet above ground level, begins to display a thermal differential that does not behave like any gas, liquid, or particulate disturbance. It is not the shimmer of rising heat. It is not moisture aggregation. The boundary of the anomalous region is described by one analyst as having a quality of geometric precision, not perfectly sharp, but exhibiting a regularity of edge that atmospheric phenomena do not produce. The anomaly grows over approximately 90 seconds from its initial radius of what appears to be 2 to 3 feet in diameter to something closer to 6 to 7 feet. It does not drift with any wind. It does not dissipate. It holds position with a stability that multiple reviewers have noted as one of its most disorienting characteristics. Then, at approximately the 8-minute mark, something moves through it. The description of what passes through that region of the frame is where the footage becomes genuinely difficult to categorize. It is not a humanoid figure in the classic sense. It is not an animal silhouette consistent with any known regional fauna. It is not a drone or aircraft. The motion profile is wrong in a fundamental way because the object does not move through the air. It moves through the anomalous thermal region in a way that multiple analysts describe as occupying and then vacating the space rather than traversing it. The duration of its presence within the frame is less than 4 seconds. What it leaves behind after it is gone is a measurable change in the thermal signature of the immediate area that persists for the remainder of the recording. A cold spot, as it would commonly be called, though that description undersells what the data actually shows. The ambient temperature in that specific region of the frame drops by a value that one reviewer with a background in thermographic analysis places at between 12 and 17 degrees relative to the surrounding field, and it does not recover to baseline within the 11-minute recording window. Now, here is where the critical analysis has to be applied, because the existence of dramatic or unusual footage does not, by itself, constitute evidence of anything beyond the fact that dramatic footage exists. The history of this location is littered with claims that dissolved under scrutiny, and intellectual honesty requires that the same standard be applied here before drawing any conclusions. The first question is provenance. Where did this footage come from, and who had access to it before it surfaced publicly? The answer, as best as can be currently determined, involves a former production contractor, not a named member of the core investigation team, but a technical support role, who was present during the filming window in question and who retained copies of raw recording files as a standard part of their workflow. The release of this material appears to have been deliberate rather than accidental, and the individual in question has, according to secondary sources, expressed specific concerns about what they describe as a pattern of selective disclosure by the production. Their claim, in essence, is that material of this nature has been captured on multiple occasions and that the decision to withhold it is institutional rather than incidental. That claim cannot be verified. The production has not issued a formal comment on the footage, the ranch's ownership has not confirmed or denied its authenticity, and the absence of official response is being interpreted by different people in completely opposite ways, as evidence of embarrassment and suppression on one side, and as simple non-engagement with unauthorized material on the other. The second question is analytical. Has the footage been subjected to the kind of technical examination that would allow a confident ruling on the most likely mundane explanations? The answer at this stage is partial. Several independent analysts have reviewed available copies of the footage, including individuals with backgrounds in infrared thermography, atmospheric optics, and digital forensics. None of them have identified markers of digital manipulation in the copies they reviewed. None of them have produced a specific conventional explanation for the thermal anomaly or the object that passes through it. That is not the same as saying no conventional explanation exists. The quality of publicly available copies is reduced from whatever the original recording quality was, and reduced quality infrared footage is significantly harder to analyze than full-resolution data. The absence of a debunking at this stage is a limitation of access, not a confirmation of the extraordinary. What the most credible analysts have said with appropriate caution is that the footage is consistent with, not proof of, but consistent with, the type of anomalous thermal and spatial events that have been reported at this specific location by multiple independent teams over a span of more than 30 years. That consistency is meaningful without being definitive. It means the footage does not obviously contradict the documented history of the property. It does not mean the documented history of the property is itself validated by the footage. The third question is context. And this is where what was missed in most of the initial online coverage becomes clear. The headlines, when this footage began circulating, focused almost entirely on the object that passes through the anomalous region, the shape, the motion, the 4-second presence. Every analysis piece and reaction video centered on that element because it is the element most immediately arresting to the human eye. But the analysts who have spent the most time with the full 11-minute recording consistently say that the object is not the most significant element in the footage. The most significant element is the anomalous region itself, what one thermographic specialist described as a structured thermal discontinuity with no identified energy source. Here is why that matters. Objects moving through frame can be explained, misidentified, fabricated, or ambiguous in ways that resist final determination. But a thermal discontinuity of the type described, with geometric boundary characteristics, stable positioning against wind, and a persistent cold differential after the object has left, implies an energy interaction with the physical environment, not a light, not a reflection, an actual thermodynamic event at a specific location in three-dimensional space. If that characterization holds under full resolution analysis, and it is an important conditional, it represents physical evidence of a kind that is genuinely harder to dismiss than any visual anomaly involving a moving shape. The persistent cold differential in particular is being discussed by researchers in terms of energy absorption. If something entered that region and caused a measurable drop in ambient thermal energy, the physics of that interaction requires an explanation. Heat does not simply vanish. It transfers, radiates, or is absorbed. If there is no atmospheric, chemical, or electrical mechanism to account for an 11 to 17 degree drop in a localized field region following the transit of an unidentified object, you are left with a gap in the explanatory model that cannot be closed by simply labeling the object as unknown and moving on. The energy has to go somewhere, and where it went, in this instance, is not accounted for by any conventional mechanism that analysts have so far been able to apply. This connects to something that the long-term research history of Skinwalker Ranch returns to repeatedly: the idea that the phenomena at this location are not primarily visual, they are energetic. The cattle mutilations in the 90s involved evidence of localized radiation exposure. The equipment failures documented by NIDS were not random. They clustered in specific areas of the property and at specific times of year. The physiological effects reported by personnel who have worked on the property, including documented cases of neurological symptoms, elevated radiation readings on personal dosimeters, and acute psychological disturbances, all point toward an environmental component that is not being generated by lights in the sky or shapes on an infrared camera. The shapes are symptoms. The energy is the phenomenon, and the thermal evidence in this footage, if it survives rigorous analysis, is the closest thing to direct measurement of that energy that has appeared in publicly accessible material. 2023 brought a development that is directly relevant to the context of this footage, even though it was not connected to it at the time. A peer-reviewed paper published in a journal covering aerospace and atmospheric physics documented the detection of an anomalous electromagnetic signature in the Uinta Basin region that could not be attributed to any known natural or artificial source. The authors of that paper were careful in their language. They did not invoke the ranch by name. They did not speculate about origin. But the coordinates of the strongest signal detection overlapped with the ranch's geographic footprint to a degree that multiple independent readers identified immediately. That paper has since been downloaded and cited by researchers with no connection to the paranormal community, people working in atmospheric science, geophysics, and electromagnetic propagation, who found the data interesting on its own terms, regardless of the location's reputation. The significance is this: if the electromagnetic anomaly documented in that paper is real and persistent, and the data presented suggests it has been present in some form for at least the duration of the measurement window, which ran across 18 months, then it represents an environmental baseline condition at this location that could theoretically generate a wide range of secondary effects: thermal anomalies, equipment interference, physiological effects on biological systems, even the behavioral abnormalities in animals that have been reported since the 1990s. A strong, anomalous electromagnetic field operating at the right frequency and intensity could, in principle, account for many of the documented phenomena without invoking anything beyond physics that is already understood. The question then becomes not what is the phenomenon, but what is generating the field. And that question has no current answer. What the recently surfaced footage adds to this context is a specific, time-stamped, visually documented event that occurred within the same geographic area as the measured electromagnetic anomaly. It does not prove a connection. It does not demonstrate that the thermal event in the footage and the measured electromagnetic signature are the same phenomenon, but they are consistent with each other in a way that invites serious, structured inquiry rather than dismissal. Let's be precise about what this footage does not establish. It does not establish the presence of non-human intelligence. It does not establish dimensional or spatial anomalies of the type described in the more speculative literature about this location. It does not confirm or validate any specific theory about what the Skinwalker Ranch phenomenon is or where it comes from. The object that passes through the thermal anomaly in approximately 4 seconds of footage cannot be identified from the available recording quality, and unidentified is not the same as extraordinary. Every unresolved mystery in the history of this property was once unidentified. Many of them were eventually identified as mistakes, misperceptions, or hoaxes. The ones that weren't are the ones that continue to drive serious scientific interest in this location. This footage belongs, for now, in the category of the unresolved, not in the category of the confirmed extraordinary. What it does do is put pressure on 2 specific questions that the production and the ownership have not answered publicly in the years since filming began. First, how much footage of this type exists in the archive that has not been broadcast or released? The contractor who released this material made an explicit claim that this is not an isolated instance. If that claim is accurate, then the selective disclosure argument has teeth. The production presents itself as a transparent scientific investigation conducted in public view. If there is a substantive archive of unaired material that includes events of the type shown in this footage, that transparency claim requires examination. Second, has the full resolution version of this footage been submitted to any independent scientific body for analysis? If not, why not? The history of extraordinary claims at this location includes a consistent pattern of data that is compelling at low resolution and either unavailable or inconclusive at full resolution. Breaking that pattern would require making the highest quality available data accessible to qualified independent researchers without a commercial or reputational interest in any particular outcome. Those two questions are not rhetorical. They are the specific points where the public record currently has gaps, and they are the points where the credibility of the ongoing investigation either stands or falls. Skinwalker Ranch has been generating documented anomalies, documented by sober, qualified people using calibrated equipment, for over 3 decades. The phenomenon has survived the scrutiny of teams that went in looking to debunk it. It has generated peer-reviewed scientific interest in at least one major study. It has produced physical effects on personnel that have been medically documented. And it exists within a geographic and geological context that remains, even in purely conventional scientific terms, genuinely unusual. None of that proves anything supernatural, but it does establish that something at this location interacts with the physical environment in ways that current models do not satisfactorily account for. The surfacing of this footage adds one more documented instance to that record. It does not close the question, it extends it. What has been definitively eliminated over 30 years of investigation is the simple explanation. The idea that every report from this property reflects misidentification, hoax, or psychological suggestion. That explanation required believing that multiple independent teams, using multiple independent methodologies across multiple decades, all arrived at false positives simultaneously and consistently. The statistical improbability of that scenario, when mapped against the actual documented record, is prohibitive. Something is happening at Skinwalker Ranch, something with measurable physical characteristics, something that has now apparently been recorded in a way that the people closest to it chose not to release. What remains entirely open is what that something is, whether the electromagnetic anomaly is a cause or a symptom, whether the thermal event in this footage represents a boundary between physical states, an unknown biological entity, an artificially generated field effect, or something that requires a framework for understanding that has not yet been developed. Whether the object that passes through the frame in less than 4 seconds is a living thing, a constructed thing, or something that does not map cleanly onto either category, the footage exists. The event it records happened in a specific place at a specific time under specific measurable conditions. The analysis is incomplete. The disclosure is partial. The questions are, for the moment, larger than the answers. That is exactly where this investigation has stood for 30 years. And if the pattern holds, it is not going to resolve cleanly or quickly. But the fact that material of this nature is now reaching the public despite institutional resistance to its release suggests that the perimeter around what is being documented at Skinwalker Ranch is beginning to give way. The people who have seen everything are no longer the only people with access to any of it. And that shift, slow, incomplete, and contested as it is, may turn out to be the most significant development this story has produced in a very long time.